26 quarterbacks have been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Out of those 26 quarterbacks, 8 of them were drafted in the first round. And out of those 8 quarterbacks, 3 were selected in the same draft class. Elway, Marino, Kelly. 3 Hall of Fame QBs that were all picked in the first round of the 1983 NFL Draft. Between these 3 quarterbacks, we have 148,303 passing yards, 957 passing touchdowns, 11 All-Pro teams, and 10 Super Bowl appearances. The 1983 NFL Draft is known as the quarterback class of 1983, holding the record for the most quarterbacks selected in the first round for over 40 years. But not all of them can be hits. It never works out like that. The 1983 draft saw 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round, and there's been plenty said about those 3 Hall of Famers mentioned at the top. And good, because I'm more interested in the stories of the other 3. The 7th, 15th, and 24th overall picks were also quarterbacks, but quarterbacks that didn't reach near the levels of success that Elway, Kelly, and Marino did. So let's go through the careers of those 3 players to shine some light on the forgotten players in an unforgettable draft class. We'll be covering each quarterback in draft order, starting from the top with the number 7 overall pick to the Kansas City Chiefs, quarterback out of Penn State, Todd Blackledge. Todd Blackledge was born in Canton, Ohio before his family moved to Princeton, New Jersey, as his dad was the offensive coordinator for the Princeton Tigers. He finished out his high school career in North Canton before committing to Penn State, which was less than 4 hours away. Blackledge had a very successful collegiate career, serving as a 3-year starter, winning the Davey O'Brien Award for the best QB in the nation, and leading Penn State to a national championship win over Georgia in the 1983 Sugar Bowl. Blackledge was the MVP of that game, throwing for 228 yards and a key 47-yard touchdown to Greg Garrity in the 4th quarter. And of course, with those kinds of accolades, NFL teams were keying on Todd Blackledge as a first-round caliber quarterback in this stacked draft class. But the question is, how high of a draft pick? In an interview that Blackledge did in 2020, reliving the pre-draft process, he said that I wasn't surprised I was drafted in round 1. I had a good idea from our talks with teams that would happen. I knew teams were interested, but I thought in the 13th to 15th pick range with teams like the Jets, Patriots, and Bills. Little did he know that he'd be picked well ahead of that range, in a move that he later admitted even surprised himself. So with the 7th overall pick, Todd Blackledge was the 2nd quarterback taken off the board and only one of 2 players in the top 7 to not have made a Pro Bowl in their career, the other being linebacker Billy Ray Smith Jr. But Blackledge's career was sort of doomed from the start. Chiefs head coach John Malkovich, whose debut into the NFL was also in 1983, set the tone very early that Blackledge wouldn't start in his rookie year. Malkovich instead opted to play a quarterback that had been on the Chiefs roster since 1980, the former 333rd pick in the 1978 NFL Draft, Bill Kenney. Kenney, who started 6 games in 1982, had thrown for 1,192 yards and 7 touchdowns, going 500 in his starts, which was enough for Malkovich to ride with the vet. And it wasn't like Blackledge wasn't ready to take over the reins in his rookie year. Blackledge played under Joe Paterno at Penn State, with Paterno putting his full faith into the team's passing game while he was under center. But regardless, 1983 was Bill Kenney's year, and he sure made the most of it. Kenney led the league in attempts and completions, throwing for 4,348 yards and 24 touchdowns, earning a Pro Bowl nod in the process. When Blackledge got spot minutes in blowout games, he did perform well, like going 4 for 5 with a touchdown against the Cardinals in Week 5 and 6 for 10 for 116 yards and a touchdown against the Broncos in Week 16. So after what was pretty much a lost season, Blackledge assumed the starting role for the Kansas City Chiefs heading into the 1984 season, but really only because Kenney started out that season on IR. Regardless, in his 8 games as a starter, he led the Chiefs to a 4-4 record, even starting out the season 2-0, scoring a combined 64 points in those 2 games. But as the weeks progressed, Blackledge had a big problem keeping the ball out of harm's way, as in his starts he threw more interceptions than touchdowns. And in a game where he subbed in at the end of the first half, Blackledge threw 3 interceptions in 17 attempts in what ended up being a 45-0 loss against Seattle. So rolling into 1985, Blackledge started this season once again as Bill Kenney's backup. And there were even players around the league that were hyping up Kenney in the media. Coming off a first-team All-Pro Defensive Player of the Year season, Seattle Seahawks safety Ken Easley said that there are very few teams in this league that can stop the Kansas City offense when Bill Kenney is healthy. I don't know if there's a better offense in the National Football League. And those words were looking valid as the Chiefs started out the season 3-1, averaging 37 points in those victories. But that hot start couldn't be sustained as the Chiefs quickly went on a 7-game losing streak, scoring 10 or less points in 4 of those games. In one of the games that Blackledge started, a game against the Rams, he went 14 for 32 passing for 161 yards and 6 interceptions in a shutout, leading a fan to tell him, "Todd Blackledge, you're an embarrassment to the city of Kansas City." Then in Week 12, with Kenny dealing with multiple injuries, including a broken bone in his throwing hand that he sustained in the preseason, Blackledge was named the starter for the remainder of the season, where he went 3-2, scoring 38 points twice. Although in the Chiefs season finale, he did only have 4 completions, but he did have 143 yards on those 4 completions, along with a touchdown, before getting benched for Kenny shortly after halftime. Yet as we roll into 1986, Chiefs head coach John Mackovich handed Blackledge the keys to the car, as far as benching Bill Kenny during this team's offseason program in May. And that decision paid off for the Chiefs, as they got off to a roaring 7-3 start to the 1986 season. But the one issue is that Blackledge only started 7 out of those 10 games, where he went 4 for 3, and actually in the 7th game, a game against the Chargers, he was benched at halftime. In his 7 starts, Todd Blackledge threw 8 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, had a game where he went 6 for 23, and took 23 total sacks. So after that Week 7 game, Blackledge was sent to the bench once again for Kenny, where the Chiefs ended their season with a 10-6 record, although Blackledge did need to start one more game in Week 14, where he led the Chiefs to a win over the Broncos. The Chiefs secured a playoff spot, setting a date with the New York Jets in the wildcard round on the road. But in the Chiefs' final game of the season against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Bill Kenny suffered a hand injury in the 4th quarter, which sidelined him for the Chiefs' first playoff game since 1971. So it was an opportunity for Todd Blackledge to step up, to fully cement himself as a quarterback of the future in Kansas City with a playoff win, erasing any doubt for next season and seasons to come. And this was a good opportunity to showcase his abilities, as the Jets were ranked 22nd out of 28 teams in points against, giving up over 24 points a game during the regular season. But Blackledge wasn't able to capitalize on his golden opportunity. He ended the game going 12 for 21 for 80 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. He was even benched after 3 quarters for Kenny, who, to remind you, had torn ligaments in his hand. The Chiefs ended up losing this game 35-15, while the Jets were bounced in the divisional round in an overtime loss to the Browns, while the Browns were then bounced in the conference championship game in an overtime loss to the Broncos. 1986 was the final year of Blackledge's 4-year rookie contract. After 4 years on the Chiefs, Blackledge had started 22 games where he went 12-10, averaging 171 yards per game in those 24 starts, while only finishing one season with more touchdowns and interceptions. Yet Blackledge was signed to a 1-year deal by the Chiefs on July 18, 1987, while head coach John Mackovich was fired shortly after the loss to the Jets. And I think Mackovich is an integral piece to the Todd Blackledge story that I really haven't gone into yet. Mackovich was an offensive coach, a few OC roles at the University of Arizona and Purdue, an assistant head coach and quarterback role for the Cowboys under Tom Landry, and even proclaimed himself as the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs while he was head coach. Like, there was no actual OC on the coaching staff. And even though he had touted himself as a one-quarterback coach, he constantly moved Kenny and Blackledge in and out of the starting role, which made Blackledge feel like he always had to look over his shoulder. Also, Blackledge and Kenny played the quarterback position very differently, which forced Mackovich to redesign his offense based on which quarterback was starting. Quote, Mackovich had been forced to redesign his offense to Blackledge's talents, which had to do with his mobility with more bootlegs and rollouts. Then when Kenny returned, the offense had to be retooled again to fit his skills. One of the quarterbacks was mobile, one of them was not. All that it's to say, when Frank Gans was named head coach for the 1987 season, who was the assistant head coach and special teams coach hired in 1986, there was optimism for Blackledge as he was given the starting job as early as training camp. In Blackledge's first 2 starts, he went 1-1, but didn't clear 80 passing yards in either of those games while only scoring 1 touchdown. Then the league was hit with a player strike, and by the time the veterans returned back to the team, Blackledge was benched once again in favor of Bill Kenny. And this was a final straw for Blackledge. Since he only signed a 1-year deal in 1987, Blackledge was technically a free agent, but since free agency didn't exist in the same form that it does today, the Chiefs still held his rights. Then on March 25, 1988, the Steelers said they were making progress with the Chiefs in obtaining Blackledge, but Blackledge would have to sign a new contract in order for the trade to go through. Then just 5 days later, Todd Blackledge was traded for a 4th-round pick and was immediately put into competition for the starting QB spot with Bubby Brister and Steve Bono. Also, Ron Blackledge, Todd's dad, was on the Steelers coaching staff at the time as the offensive line coach. Chiefs owner Lamar Hunt said of Blackledge that, if we had drafted Dan Marino, then we'd be in pretty good shape. Only Miami can make that statement. We got the only one who is not good at this point. Until your quarterback situation is resolved, it is always a concern. But now Pittsburgh had its opportunity to right the wrongs from the 1983 draft and have their chance at a quarterback from that esteemed class. However, that didn't come to life. Bubby Brister was named the starter heading into the season. He went 1-4 in his first 5 starts. Then Blackledge was inserted as the starter from week 6 to 8, where he went 1-2, averaging 165 yards in those 3 games, with 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Then from week 9 through the end of the season, Brister was named the starter, where he went 3-5 to end the year. Then in the 1989 season, Blackledge was again the backup to Bubby Brister and again started a few games in the middle of the season where he went 1-1 with 1 touchdown to 3 interceptions, 4 sacks, and 3 fumbles. And that was his career. Todd Blackledge retired from pro football following the 1989 NFL season. He ended his career with a 15-14 record as a starter, 5,286 yards on a 48.1% completion percentage, 29 touchdowns, and 38 interceptions. But that wasn't completely the end of his story in football. He went on to be a successful broadcaster for both college football and the NFL. He also hosted a segment called Todd's Taste of the Town, where he would visit local restaurants and review the food, getting his Guy Fieri on. The next non-Hall of Fame quarterback chosen in the 1983 NFL Draft came 8 picks after Blackledge and only 1 pick after Jim Kelly, and that is quarterback Tony Eason, selected by the New England Patriots 15th overall out of the University of Illinois. Born and raised in California, Eason's early football career started off rocky. Despite a strong high school football career, Eason only had 1 D1 scholarship, which was from the University of the Pacific in Stockton. But he was denied admission due to bad grades, so he took the JUCO route and attended the American River Junior College in Sacramento, where he spent 2 years from 1978 to 1979. I couldn't find his stats from his time at JUCO, but they must have been pretty impressive as he transferred to the University of Illinois, taking over the starting QB role in 1981. Eason's first game in 1981 was against Pitt, whose starting QB was fellow 1983 draft classmate Dan Marino. And Eason's first season in D1 football was wildly successful, as he threw for over 3,300 yards and had 20 touchdowns, while leading Illinois to the 3rd-ranked passing attack in the nation. He led the Big Ten in efficiency and total offense and set 9 conference records in the process. All of this led him to earning the nickname Champagne Tony. Then in 1982, Eason took it up another level, leading Illinois to its first bowl game appearance since the 1964 Rose Bowl. By the end of his senior season, he set the NCAA record for the most total yards per game in a career, most passing yards per game in a career, most completions per game in a career, and most total yards in a QB's first 2 seasons. So we get to draft night once again, and Tony Eason was selected 15th overall by the New England Patriots, marking the 3rd time in franchise history that the team selected a QB in the first round. But the Patriots weren't the only team that was interested in Eason's services. The USFL was calling, as well as the Canadian Football League, with Eason even saying that, before I came to Montreal, I had my eyes set on the NFL, basically because I'm from the United States and all my heroes I grew up with were in that league. As I feel now, I don't think it would be a bad choice for me to come here. But even with all that, on May 26, 1983, it was reported that Eason signed his 4-year, $2.3 million contract with the Patriots to be their new starting quarterback. Maybe. The reason for the hesitation is that Steve Grogan was still on the Patriots roster, the New England QB who had been the full-time starter since 1976, but suffered through 2 injury-riddled seasons in 1981 and 1982. And heading into his age 30 season, Grogan began the year once again as a starting QB for the Patriots, going 6-6 through his first 12 games. Then in the final 4 games of the season, Tony Eason was inserted as a starter where he went 2-2, averaging 139 passing yards in those 4 games, along with only 1 passing touchdown and 5 total picks. And to start the 1984 season, Steve Grogan was once again the starting quarterback, but for only 3 games. Because in that 3rd game, against the Seattle Seahawks, the Patriots went on 23-0 in the 2nd quarter after a Steve Grogan pick 6 by Ken Easley, the second Ken Easley mentioned in this video. After that pick 6, Grogan was benched and it was time for Tony Eason to take over the starting role. Not only did he lead the Patriots back down from 23-0 with his 2 touchdowns through the air and 1 on the ground, he led the Patriots to a 38-23 victory. His next start was a loss, and then he went on a 3-game winning streak, including a game against the Jets, where he threw for 354 yards and 3 touchdowns. Eason ended the year with a 7-6 record as a starter, where he threw for 3,228 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, only 8 picks, and 5 touchdowns on the ground. So heading into the 1985 season, Tony Eason took over the reins as the Patriots' starting QB, finally beginning the season as a presumed full-time starter. And after week 1, it was looking like a good decision. He led New England to a win over Green Bay, going 21 for 28 for 241 yards and a touchdown. but his play was inconsistent to start the season. Week 2 was a loss to Chicago where he threw 3 picks and took 6 sacks. Then a Week 3 win, but he only threw for 100 yards. Then a loss to the Raiders where he had only a 36% completion percentage, along with another loss to the Browns in the following week. Then in Week 6, after taking 3 straight sacks in the second quarter, head coach Raymond Berry saw enough and inserted Steve Grogan into the game. He led the Patriots to a 14-3 victory over the Bills, and unfortunately for Eason, what preceded was 5 more straight victories where Grogan was leading the charge. Grogan later said, when asked about that point in his career, that, "I figured my time in New England was over with. I figured they would look to deal me when the season was over with. I had no idea that this would ever happen." But this team and this winning streak was led more by the defense than anything else. During the Pats' 6-game winning streak, the Pats' defense generated 22 turnovers and held opponents under 100 rushing yards in the first 4 games. This team was rolling. But in their Week 12 game against the Jets, Steve Grogan suffered a broken leg, and Tony Eason was back starting for the team once again. They lost that game in overtime, but he finished the season going 3-1, which gave the Pats an 11-5 record with a wildcard matchup against the Jets at the Meadowlands. And unlike Blackledge, Eason was able to take advantage of his first trip to the playoffs. He went 12 for 16 for 179 yards and a touchdown in a win against the Jets. Then he only threw 7 completions for 117 yards and a touchdown against the Raiders in the divisional, but did just enough for the Patriots to get the win. And it definitely helped that the Patriots defense forced 6 turnovers. So 2 road playoff upsets set Eason and the Patriots up in the conference championship game against fellow 1983 draft classmate Dan Marino and the Miami Dolphins. The Patriots hadn't won in the Orange Bowl since 1966, losing 18 straight games. So everyone was predicting a Dolphins victory, but not so fast. The Patriots believed in their rallying cry, "Squish the fish." Heavily dependent on the running game, the Patriots beat up on the Dolphins, winning the game 31-14, with Eason only needing to throw 12 passes, but he completed 10 of those passes for 3 touchdowns. The Patriots and Tony Eason were going to the Super Bowl. But the issue is, this was the 1985 season, and the 1985 season was also the year of the Monsters of the Midway, and they had to release their Super Bowl shuffle. So Eason and the Patriots were stopped dead in their tracks. Eason ended his night going 0 for 6 with 3 sacks and a fumble, and by the time it was 20-3 midway through the second quarter, Tony Eason was benched for Steve Grogan once again, who battled on the way to a 46-10 loss. Tony Eason was the first and remains the only starting quarterback without a completion in a Super Bowl, and his teammates were frustrated with him. Hall of Fame Patriots offensive lineman John Hanna said that Tony should wear a skirt instead of a uniform. When he was hurt before we played the Bears in the Super Bowl, we were hoping he'd stay hurt so Steve could play. It was reported that Eason was dealing with an illness heading into the Super Bowl, with a New York Times article stating that he was up in bed Thursday night with a fever of 101, with what was described as a viral infection. But that was just one game. It was on in 1986 where Tony Eason was leading the charge for the Patriots team that still had high expectations. And in the 14 games that Eason started that season, 2 games missed due to injury, he threw for 3,328 yards and 19 touchdowns, leading the Patriots to their first AFC East title in 8 years. This included a game against the Seahawks where he threw for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, and another game against the Rams where he had 375 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also tied players like Joe Montana, Walter Payton, and Jerry Rice in MVP voting, with 1 vote. The Patriots had the number 2 scoring offense in the NFL this season, and this success set them up with a playoff matchup against the Denver Broncos, against yet another 1983 draft classmate in John Elway. At Mile High Stadium, Eason got the first touchdown with a 19-yard pass to Stanley Morgan, then a John Elway touchdown run followed by field goals for both teams, then a 45-yard touchdown pass once again to Stanley Morgan to go up 4 in the third quarter before the Broncos scored a 48-yard touchdown to put them up by 3. No team scored in the fourth quarter until 1:41 left in the clock, where Tony Eason had the ball on the 10-yard line. But he took a 10-yard sack for a safety, which iced the game for the Broncos, where they moved on to the AFC Championship game. Heading into the 1987 season, Eason was a presumed starter for the team once again, but he had to miss Week 1 due to a groin injury, which led to Grogan receiving the start. But Eason was back for Week 2, where he started in a loss to the Jets, throwing for 186 yards on 53% completion percentage. Then the strike impacted Weeks 3 to 6, but he was back for a start in Week 7, which was another loss, this time to the Colts, where he had a decent stat line. But his start in Week 8 ended up being his last start of the season. Against the Raiders, he started out the game 2 for 3 passing for 21 yards. But after taking a hit by Raiders DB Stacy Torin, Eason suffered a separated shoulder that knocked him out of that game and sidelined him for the rest of the season. Heading into the 1988 season, Patriots head coach Raymond Berry appointed Grogan once again as a starting quarterback for this team. Safe to say, Eason was not happy with his decision, as not only was he not named the starter, but the Patriots also reportedly wanted to cut Eason's base salary from $875,000 to $550,000, with incentives that could bring it back up to about $900,000. Regardless, Eason was still on the roster for that season, but didn't see any action until the final 2 weeks of the season, where he started 2 games throwing for 249 yards and 2 picks in those games. The season finale was a game that would decide whether or not the Patriots would be heading into the playoffs, and even in the last game of the season, Eason was once again benched for Steve Grogan early into the fourth quarter. But even with a disappointing end to the year, in the 1989 offseason, Tony Eason signed a 2-year, $2.35 million contract with the Patriots, making him the 9th highest player in the NFL at that time. For comparison, Justin Herbert is currently the 9th highest paid player in the NFL at a $52.5 million average annual salary. Head coach Raymond Berry would be leaning on Eason to be the starter once offseason training kicked off in July. But 1989 would actually be Eason's final season with the Patriots, and his final season being a starting QB in the NFL. He started 3 games, going 1 for 2 in those matches against the Jets, Dolphins, and Seahawks, putting up some good yardage, but not being very efficient with the ball. But after being benched ahead of the team's Week 4 matchup for Doug Flutie, Tony Eason was waived by the Patriots after team owner Victor Khayyam tried to change the structure of the deal. According to this article, owner Victor Khayyam contended that he had agreed last spring to pay $1.1 million this season and $1.25 million in 1990 on the basis that Eason would be the starter. With the season half over, Eason already earned half of his annual salary, $550,000. New England proposed that for the rest of the year, Eason be paid his weekly salary of $68,750 only in weeks in which he plays at least 50% of the game. Otherwise, he would get nothing. The Jets claimed Tony Eason one day after he was waived, but this created an entire saga in and of itself. After he was claimed, Eason didn't report to the Jets and was willing to give up the remaining portion of his $1.1 million salary for the 1989 season. Why wasn't he reporting? Because his good friend from childhood was on the roster and currently serving as the Jets' starting QB. But less than a week later, he reported to the Jets, where he ended up starting the final 2 games of that season when the Jets were already 4-10 at that point. Tony Eason would be relegated to the bench for the entire 1990 NFL season and only made an appearance in 6 games before retiring after that season at the age of 31. Now we need to go back, because this good friend of Tony Eason actually leads us to the 3rd and final quarterback that we'll be highlighting in this video, and that's 1983 24th overall pick, Ken O'Brien. Ken O'Brien is by far, and not even close, the most accomplished quarterback among the 3 non-Hall of Fame QBs drafted in the first round of the 1983 NFL Draft. Ken O'Brien played high school football at Jesuit High School in Carmichael, California, 30 minutes away from where Tony Eason played high school ball. Ken O'Brien stayed local for college, playing D2 football his entire collegiate career, starting at Sacramento State, then transferring to UC Davis. In his senior season, he led UC Davis to a 10-0 record, number 2 in overall offense, and number 3 in passing offense in the entire country. But when draft day rolled around on April 26, O'Brien wasn't focused on the draft. He was focused on his Spanish exam. So when he received a call from the New York Jets head coach, Joe Walton, at 8:03 in the morning, he was shocked and woke up his roommates to tell them the good news. But he wasn't the only one that was shocked. Jets fans in attendance at the draft booed the selection, especially since Dan Marino was still on the board. And O'Brien even said after he retired that, who blames the fans, right? Who in New York has heard of University of California, Davis? Nobody. I'm not sure I would have reacted any differently. Heck, some of my cousins grew up as Jets fans. They were probably doing the same thing. O'Brien sat on the sidelines his entire rookie year, not even seeing a single minute of game action. Then O'Brien saw limited starting action in his sophomore season. Luckily for O'Brien, the Jets didn't have a strong presumed starter on the roster, as although the Jets started Pat Ryan for the first 11 games of the season, that was his first season in his 7-year career where he started a game. When looking at the regular season, when O'Brien took over the starting role in Week 12, although he went 1 for 4, he did throw 200 plus yards in each game, including a 351-yard game along with 6 touchdowns to 7 picks. This was good enough to give him the starting spot heading into his 3rd season, and he took full advantage. The Jets started off the year with a 0-31 loss to the Raiders, but quickly went on a 5-game winning streak where the Jets averaged 28.6 points per game and O'Brien threw 6 touchdowns and only 1 pick. O'Brien was playing at a high level this season, including a duel against Dan Marino, where he threw for 393 yards and 2 touchdowns in a loss, followed up by a 367-yard, 5-touchdown win over the Bucs, where the Jets scored 62 points. O'Brien was a Pro Bowler this year, and their 11-5 record was good enough for them to host a wildcard game against New England, where they fell to Tony Eason and the Patriots while they were on their magical playoff run that I went through before. He ended the year with the highest passer rating in the NFL, along with leading the league in interception percentage, but he also did lead the league in sacks with 62. Regardless, there was a ton of optimism for Jets fans surrounding their young QB heading into year 4. And boy, did he meet those expectations. Ken O'Brien and the Jets started the 1987 season 10-1, including an 8-game winning streak. During the start, he threw for over 400 yards twice, including a shootout with Dan Marino and the Dolphins, where O'Brien beat the QB drafted 3 spots after him with a 479-yard, 4-touchdown performance. This led to an article published one day later titled simply, "Thank you, Ken O'Brien." He also set a record that stood for nearly 30 years when he threw for 431 yards and 4 touchdowns with a perfect passer rating, marking the first time in history that a QB achieved a perfect passer rating throwing for 400 plus yards. But starting in week 12, things started going downhill, and they went downhill fast. Just looking at passer rating, from weeks 1 through 11, O'Brien only had 2 games with a passer rating under 60. Then from weeks 12 through 16, he never eclipsed a passer rating over 60 again. This was accompanied by a 5-game losing streak, 12 interceptions to only 2 touchdowns, and 16 sacks. This drastic decline in play could be blamed on injuries to his knee and throwing hand. The Jets dragged themselves into the playoffs for a first-round matchup against the Chiefs, but in a shocking turn of events, O'Brien was benched and Jets head coach Joe Walton decided to go with Pat Ryan. When Walton was asked about this, he said, "I just felt like we needed a little lift. We've got to win this week and there's no tomorrow," while also saying that, as a team, we needed a little excitement. This proved to be the right call, as the Jets beat the Todd Blackledge-led Chiefs 35-10, with Pat Ryan going 16 for 23 passing for 153 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Jets kept Ryan as their starter for their divisional round matchup against the Browns, so heading into Cleveland, the Jets got the first score with a 42-yard touchdown pass from Pat Ryan to Wesley Walker. The Browns tied up the game, then went up by 3, but Pat Ryan left the game with an injury, and Ken O'Brien took his place under center in an attempt to salvage the terrible end to the season with a playoff win. This was a back-and-forth game that went into double overtime, but the Browns eventually pulled out the win on their first possession in double OT with a game-winning field goal. Ken O'Brien was overwhelmed by the Browns' pass rush, going 11 for 19 passing for 134 yards and taking 6 sacks. After a brief holdout in the offseason heading into his option year of his rookie contract, which included being fined $1,000 a day, O'Brien signed a 2-year extension with the Jets. And although he was benched to end the 1986 season, O'Brien started out the year as a Jets starter and started out the year with back-to-back division wins against the Bills and the Patriots, leading the team to score 31 and 43 points in those games. After the player strike, O'Brien lost his momentum going into a 2-game losing streak and ended the year going 5-7 as a starter, throwing for 2,696 yards and 13 touchdowns, once again leading the league in interception percentage. The Jets finished the 1988 season with an 8-7-1 record, with O'Brien only starting 12 of the team's games, and the same was true in the 1989 season, but the Jets had a far worse record going 4-12. O'Brien did break his middle toe on his left foot during training camp heading into the 1989 season, but still managed to begin the season as a starting QB. So heading into 1990, O'Brien was already 30 years old, had suffered numerous injuries over the past couple of seasons, and the Jets had failed to make the playoffs in their past 3 seasons. And although O'Brien started all 16 games for the first time since 1985, his play was very up and down, including 2 games where he failed to throw over 100 yards, and ending the season with a 55% completion percentage and 13 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. The 1991 offseason was a chaotic one for the Jets situation at QB. In the draft, Jets GM Dick Steinberg was eyeing Brett Favre, making him the #1 player on his draft board. The issue is, the Jets didn't own a first rounder as they used it in the prior year's supplemental draft to draft receiver Rob Moore. But when Favre dropped to the 2nd round, the Jets tried everything to trade up from the 34th pick to select him. And even when the Jets thought they had a deal worked out with the Cardinals, who had pick 32, the deal was called off, and the Falcons ended up selecting Favre at pick 33. And second-year head coach Bruce Coslett waited until the final days of the preseason to indicate that Ken O'Brien would be the team's starting QB for the 1991 season. In what would be O'Brien's final season as a full-time starter, He led the Jets to the playoffs with an 8-8 record, threw for 3,300 yards, only had 10 touchdowns and 11 picks, but he led the league in game-winning drives with 5 and made the Pro Bowl as well. An 8-8 record was good enough to set the Jets up with a first-round playoff matchup against the Oilers in Houston, but O'Brien's 3 interceptions was too much to overcome as the Jets lost the game 17-10. O'Brien did have a shot at the end of the game with 53 seconds left to tie the game up, but he threw his final interception with 6 seconds left, which iced the game. O'Brien held out for 35 days in the offseason before eventually signing another 2-year contract with the Jets, but the team was unsure who'd be the starting QB. It was a competition between O'Brien and the quarterback that the Jets chose at the 34th pick in the prior year's draft, Browning Nagel. The Jets eventually named Nagel as a starting QB in late August, and this would really be the start of the end of O'Brien's NFL career. He only started 3 more games with the Jets in the 1992 season, and even after leading the team to a win over the Dolphins where he threw for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns, Bruce Coslett decided to start Nagel once again when he turned back from injury the following week. And once the Jets traded for Boomer Esiason in the offseason, O'Brien's time in New York was officially over as the team traded him to the Packers 3 weeks later. But O'Brien was cut by Green Bay in training camp, and this left him to sign with the Eagles, serving as Randall Cunningham's backup to start the year. After Cunningham broke his leg in a 35-30 win over the Jets to start the season 4-0, Bubby Brister served as the team's starter for the next 2 games before O'Brien took over from weeks 9 through 12. But in those 4 games, the Eagles and O'Brien went 0-4, never scoring more than 2 touchdowns, and O'Brien was benched in the 4th start and proceeded to never play another game in the NFL. And that was his career. Ken O'Brien retired following the 1993 season, ending his career with over 25,000 passing yards, 128 touchdowns, and a 50-59-1 record as a starter. All 3 of these non-Hall of Fame quarterbacks from the 1983 NFL Draft dealt with their fair share of uncertainties, injuries, and inconsistencies. It's hard to say what their careers would have been if they were placed in different situations, but we can only take their careers for what they were. The 2024 NFL Draft tied the record of QBs taken in the first round with 6, and I'm very curious to see how this class compares to the historic draft class that came 40 years before them.